The first thing I heard was a voice. Soft, urgent, cutting through the fog in my head. "She's waking up." 3 words that changed everything. I wasn't supposed to open my eyes again. Not after the heart attack. The flashing lights of the ambulance, the cold steel of the operating table. But here I was, alive, in a sterile hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and regret. The rhythmic beep of machines told me my heart was still fighting, even if my mind was struggling to catch up. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 68, a retired librarian who spent 30 years organizing stories and books, never imagining I'd become the center of one so cruel. My eyelids felt heavy, like they'd been sewn shut, but I forced them open. The fluorescent lights above burned my vision, and I blinked, trying to make sense of the blurred faces hovering over me. My daughter, Laura, was there, her perfectly curled hair framing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Next to her stood Mark, my son-in-law, his hands in his pockets, a shiny new watch glinting on his wrist. "Funny how you notice the small things when your world's about to crack open, Mom." "Oh, thank God you're awake," Laura said, her voice thick with rehearsed relief. I knew that tone. I'd heard it when she was a teenager, explaining why she'd missed curfew. It was the sound of someone trying too hard to sound sincere. Mark stepped closer, his smile polished, like he was pitching a deal. "We were so worried, Evelyn. It's a miracle you pulled through." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, like I'd swallowed sandpaper. The last thing I remembered was dinner at my lake house in Michigan, the house where I'd planned to spend my retirement. Watching the water ripple under the stars, reading novels I'd never had time for. I could still taste the chamomile tea Mark had insisted I drink that night. "Helps with stress," he'd said, handing me the cup with a smile that felt too warm. Then came the pain, sharp, searing, like a knife in my chest. I'd collapsed right there in my dining room, the world fading to black. "Evelyn, don't strain yourself," Mark said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "Everything's been taken care of while you were out." That phrase, "everything's been taken care of," hung in the air like a warning. In my 30 years as a librarian, I'd learned that vague assurances like that usually hid something. "Ugly, what do you mean?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. Laura and Mark exchanged a glance, the kind couple's perfect when they're hiding something. Laura cleared her throat, her fingers twisting the strap of her new designer purse. "Well, Mom, given your condition, the doctors said you need to avoid stress, so we made some decisions for you." Mark jumped in, his tone as slick as a salesman's. "We sold the lake house. The sale went through yesterday. It was the best way to cover your medical expenses." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. The lake house, my sanctuary, the place where I'd scattered my late husband's ashes, where every sunrise felt like a promise of peace, gone. "I'm sorry." "What?" I managed, my heart monitor beeping faster. Mark leaned forward, his expression all professional concern. "The Michigan property, Evelyn, it was a tough call, but we had to act fast. The buyer was ready, and the funds will secure your care, my care." The words echoed in my head, hollow and wrong. I'd never agreed to sell my house. I'd never even discussed it. That house wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was my future, my refuge. I stared at Mark, noticing the way his eyes avoided mine, the way his new watch caught the light. And Laura, my Laura, stood there, her face a mask of worry, but her new purse screamed money we didn't have. Something was wrong, very wrong. "I never signed anything," I whispered, my voice shaking. Mark pulled a folder from his briefcase, producing a document with a flourish. "Actually, you did, right here." He pointed to a signature that looked eerily like mine. If you tilted your head and ignored the slight tremor in the lines, it could have fooled anyone. "The doctors warned us about memory issues after a heart attack," he added, his tone dripping with sympathy. "It's normal to feel confused." Confused. That word stung. I'd spent my life organizing information, piecing together facts like puzzles. I wasn't confused. I was betrayed. But my body was weak, my mind foggy from medication. I closed my eyes, trying to anchor myself. When I opened them, Laura was watching me, her smile faltering. Mark's hand rested on her shoulder, but his eyes were on that damn watch, like he was counting the seconds until he could leave. "I need to rest," I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Laura kissed my forehead, her perfume sharp and expensive. "Of course, Mom, we'll let you sleep." As they left, I caught a glimpse of Mark's briefcase. Embroidered on the leather was the logo of his financial firm, Sterling Wealth Advisors, a firm that specialized in high-stakes investments and, apparently, in selling houses that didn't belong to them. If you're listening to this, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Because what happened next? It's a story about family, trust, and the kind of truth that cuts deeper than any knife. Lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by the hum of machines and the sharp scent of disinfectant, I felt like a book with missing pages. My name is Evelyn Harper, a 60-year-old retired librarian, and I'd just been told my lake house, my sanctuary, my future was sold while I was fighting for my life. My daughter Laura and her husband Mark swore it was for my own good, but their words felt like lies wrapped in concern. That signature on the sale document, it looked like mine, but I had no memory of signing it. And Mark's shiny new watch, Laura's designer Perstos, weren't the kind of things you buy on a whim, not on their income. I closed my eyes, trying to piece together the days before my heart attack. My lake house in Michigan was my refuge, a place where the water shimmered like glass under the morning sun, where I'd planned to read every book I'd shelved for others over 30 years. The last clear memory I had was dinner with Laura and Mark. Mark had been unusually attentive, insisting I try his chamomile tea. "It'll help with your stress, Evelyn," he'd said, his smile as smooth as the lake on a windless day. I'd sipped it, trusting him. Then came the chest pain, the dizziness, the fall. I'd thought it was my heart, giving out from age. Now, I wasn't so sure. "Mrs. Harper, how are we feeling today?" Nurse Sophie's voice pulled me back. She was about 55, with a no-nonsense warmth that reminded me of the best librarians I'd worked with, people who saw through excuses. She adjusted my four with steady hands, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. I studied her, wondering if she'd seen cases like mine before, like someone who just found out her house was sold while she was unconscious. I said, keeping my tone light but watching her reaction. "Either that's remarkably efficient family planning, or something else entirely." Sophie paused, her fingers still on the ivy line. Her eyes met mine, sharp and knowing. "That's unusual, to say the least," she said carefully. "Real estate deals like that usually require the owner's presence, or at least a clear paper trail." Her words were measured, but they carried weight. In my years organizing library records, I'd learned to spot when someone was saying more than their words aloud. Sophie was telling me to dig deeper. "I don't remember signing anything," I said, my voice low, "but they showed me a document with my signature." Sophie's brow furrowed, just for a moment. "Memory can be tricky after a cardiac event," she said, "but big decisions like that, they're supposed to involve you, not happen around you. If you want, I can help you request copies of your medical records. Might jog your memory." I nodded, grateful for her quiet strength. As she left, I replayed the past few months in my mind. Mark had been visiting more often, always with a reason, checking my blood pressure, bringing groceries, brewing that damn tea. "You've been looking tired, Evelyn," he'd say, his voice dripping with concern. "Let me handle the small stuff." At the time, I'd thought he was being kind. I'd even appreciated it. My late husband, Tom, had been the practical one, and after he passed, I'd leaned on Laura and Mark more than I realized. But now, those visits felt different, calculated. I remembered the headaches, the fatigue, the moments when I'd forget where I parked my car or what I'd meant to say. I'd blamed age, the Michigan winters, the loneliness of a house too big for one person. But what if it wasn't age? What if it was something or someone else? Mark was a financial advisor, the kind who managed million-dollar portfolios for wealthy clients. If anyone knew how to make a signature look real, it was him. That afternoon, Laura came back alone, her eyes puffy like she'd been crying. "Mom, I know this is a lot," she said, sitting by my bed, "but we only sold the house to make sure you're taken care of. The medical bills, they're going to be huge." Her voice cracked, but I noticed her nails freshly manicured, bright red polish that didn't come cheap. My daughter had always loved nice things, but she'd never had the money for them. Not until now. "Laura," I said, keeping my voice soft, "when did I agree to sell the house?" "I don't remember any of it." She hesitated, her fingers twisting the strap of that expensive purse. "You were so stressed, Mom. You told Mark you wanted to simplify things, downsize. He handled the paperwork so you wouldn't have to." Her words sounded rehearsed, like lines from a script she hadn't fully memorized. I wanted to believe her. Laura was my daughter, my only child. We'd had our share of distance over the years. She was busy with her banking job, her marriage, her life, but she'd always been my girl. Yet something in her eyes didn't add up. "Where's the money from the sale?" I asked. "Is it in escrow?" Laura's face froze for a split second, like a deer caught in headlights. "Mark's handling it," she said quickly. "He set up a trust for your care. It's all safe." Safe. That word felt like a lie. I was about to press her when the door opened, and a woman walked in who I hadn't seen in months. My younger sister Clara, 60 years old and sharp as ever, stood there in a tailored blazer, her eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Clara was a retired lawyer, the kind who could make corporate executives sweat with a single question. "Evelyn," she said, her voice warm but firm as she hugged me. "I came as soon as I heard." "You heard?" I asked, surprised. Laura shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't call her," she mumbled. Clara's lips tightened. "A friend at the courthouse tipped me off about a property sale in your name," she said, "which is interesting, because I distinctly remember setting up a trust for your lake house after Tom died." My heart skipped a beat, and the monitor beside me beeped in protest. "What trust?" Laura asked, her voice suddenly small. Clara's eyes narrowed, not at Laura but at the empty space where Mark had stood earlier. "The irrevocable trust I established for you, Evelyn, in 2010. It protects the lake house from being sold or transferred without my approval as trustee. You have lifetime rights to live there, but you don't own it outright. No one can sell it, not you, not Mark." The room felt like it tilted. If Clara was right, and she was rarely wrong, then Mark's sale was a sham, a fraud. I looked at Laura, whose face had gone pale, her hands trembling. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Mark said everything was legal." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and they painted a picture, uglier than I'd ever imagined. That as Clara sat down, pulling out a notepad with the precision of someone who'd spent decades unraveling financial messes, I felt a spark of the old Evelyn, the librarian who could find answers in the chaos of 1,000 books. If Mark thought he could outsmart me, he was about to learn that even a heart attack couldn't dull my instincts. I just needed to figure out what game he was playing, and how deep Laura was in it. The hospital room felt smaller each day, the walls closing in as my suspicions grew heavier. I'm Evelyn Harper, 68, a retired librarian who thought I'd left puzzles behind in the stacks of books. But here I was, piecing together a betrayal that cut deeper than any heart attack. My lake house in Michigan, my sanctuary, my future was supposedly sold by my daughter Laura and her husband Mark while I lay unconscious. That signature on the sale document wasn't mine, no matter how much it looked like it. And Mark's chamomile tea, his constant visits, his blood pressure checks, they weren't kindness, they were something else entirely. Nurse Sophie had planted the first seed of doubt, hinting that selling a house during a medical crisis was suspicious. My sister Clara, a retired lawyer with a knack for sniffing out lies, had dropped a bombshell. My lake house was locked in an irrevocable trust, untouchable without her approval. If that was true, Mark's sale was a fraud. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof, and I needed to know how far this went, how much Laura knew, and whether my own daughter was part of this. That morning, Dr. Alan Carter, a cardiologist with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes, came to review my chart. He was about 50, the kind of doctor who read every line of a report like it was a novel. "Mrs. Harper," he said, sitting beside my bed, "your heart attack was caused by an irregular rhythm, likely triggered by an overdose of beta. Your blood pressure medication, metoprolol, was found at levels far higher than prescribed." His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through my mind. "An overdose?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "How could that happen?" Dr. Carter hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's possible someone tampered with your medication. I've ordered a toxicology screen to check for other substances. In the meantime, can you tell me exactly what you were taking before your collapse?" I thought back to the weeks before. My usual metoprolol, a daily multivitamin, the occasional aspirin for joint pain, and then there was Mark's chamomile tea, which he'd brought over almost daily. "It's a special blend," he'd said, smiling as he poured it. "Helps with your blood pressure, Evelyn." I'd trusted him, sipped it without question, but now I remembered the bitter aftertaste, the way my hands shook after drinking it, the fog that clouded my thoughts. Mark gave me tea, I said slowly. He said it was herbal, from a wellness clinic, and he checked my blood pressure a lot. Said it was high. Dr. Carter's pen stopped moving. High blood pressure, he said, frowning. Your records show your blood pressure was well controlled for years. Why would he think it was high? That was the question, wasn't it? Mark, a financial advisor who handled million-dollar deals, wasn't a doctor, but he'd acted like one, hovering over me with that home monitor, insisting I needed his help. I looked at Dr. Carter, my librarian instincts kicking in. Could the tea have been spiked with something? It's possible, he said. The toxicology results will tell us more. For now, I'd advise you not to take anything unless it's prescribed and dispensed by hospital staff. His tone was gentle, but the warning was clear. Someone had tried to harm me, and the list of suspects was painfully short. Clara came by that afternoon, her legal pad already filled with notes. She'd been digging into the lake house sale, calling in favors from old colleagues at the courthouse. Evelyn, she said, her voice low but fierce. I checked the property records. The sale Mark claims went through. It's a sham. The trust I set up in 2010 makes it impossible for anyone but me to authorize a transfer. He'd have known that if he did a proper title search, then why try to sell it? I asked, my mind racing. Clara's eyes narrowed. Money. He got a buyer to transfer funds, probably a hefty deposit into an account he controls. But that's not all. She pulled out a printout from her briefcase. I found transactions linked to Mark's firm. He's been moving money from your retirement account into an offshore account. Your signatures on those transfers too. My retirement account, the nest egg Tom and I had built over decades, meant to keep me comfortable in my lake house. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital air. How much? I whispered. Clara's jaw tightened. $500,000 so far. He's been siphoning it off for weeks. I stared at her, the weight of it sinking in. Mark wasn't just after my house. He was dismantling my entire future. Laura and Mark returned that evening, their faces a mix of concern and something else, maybe, or fear. Laura sat by my bed, her hands fidgeting with her earrings, new ones that sparkled too brightly. Mark stood back, his arms crossed, that damn watch catching the light. Mom, you're looking better, Laura said, her voice too bright. We just want to make sure you're okay. I'm feeling clearer, I said, my tone even, watching them both. Clear enough to have some questions about the house sale. Mark's smile didn't waver, but his eyes flicked to Laura. Of course. Evelyn, what do you want to know? When did I sign those papers? I asked, keeping my voice soft but sharp. Mark didn't miss a beat. A few days before your heart attack. You called me, said you were worried about finances, asked me to set up the sale. I brought the documents to your house, and we went over them together. It was a good story, smooth as his sales pitches. But I'd spent 30 years spotting inconsistencies in research papers and student excuses. This didn't add up. And the retirement account, I said, watching him closely. Did I ask you to move that money too? Mark's smile froze, just for a second, but it was enough. Laura's head snapped up, her eyes wide. What retirement account? She asked, her voice trembling. Clara, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, leaned forward, her legal pad in hand. The $500,000 Mark transferred offshore. Laura, using Evelyn's signature. Care to explain that? The air in the room turned heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it, his polished confidence cracking. There's been a misunderstanding, he said finally. I was protecting Evelyn's assets. The market's volatile, and protecting. Clara cut in, her voice like a blade, by forging her signature. By trying to sell a house you knew was in a trust. Laura's face drained of color, her hands shaking. A trust? She whispered. Mark, you said the sale was legal. You said. Mom agreed. I looked at my daughter, searching for the truth in her eyes. She seemed genuinely shocked, but I'd learned not to trust appearances. Laura, I said softly, did you know about the trust? She shook her head, tears welling up. No, Mom, I swear. Mark said you wanted to downsize. That it was your idea. He showed me the papers. Then, how did he get my bank account passwords? I asked, my voice steady but piercing. Laura froze, her tears stopping as if someone had flipped a switch. I gave them to him, she admitted, her voice barely audible. He said he needed them to manage your bills while you were sick. I thought he was helping. The room went silent. the weight of her words sinking in. Laura hadn't just been manipulated, she'd handed Mark the keys to my life. My own daughter, caught in his web, had given him access to everything. I felt a pang of betrayal, sharper than anything Mark had done. But before I could speak, Nurse Sophie stepped into the room, holding a small device. "Mrs. Harper," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I need to inform you that this conversation has been recorded. Hospital policy requires it in cases of suspected elder abuse." Mark's face went rigid, his eyes darting to the door like a trapped animal. "This is ridiculous," he stammered. "You're twisting everything." But Sophie wasn't done. "Massachusetts is a one-party consent state," she said, her tone matter-of-fact, "and I've heard enough to know the police will want to hear this too." Laura let out a sob, her hands covering her face. Mark turned to her, his voice low and urgent. "Laura, tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you knew about the plan." But Laura just shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You lied to me," she whispered. "You lied to both of us." I looked at my daughter, torn between anger and pity. Mark had played us both, but Laura's mistake had nearly cost me everything. The truth was out now, but the pieces of our family were scattered, and I wasn't sure we could ever put them back together. The hospital room was quiet now, the echoes of Nurse Sophie's recorded conversation still ringing in my ears. "I'm Evelyn Harper, 68, a retired librarian who'd spent decades organizing stories, never imagining I'd be unraveling one about my own betrayal. My son-in-law Mark had tried to sell my lake house in Michigan, a house locked in a trust he couldn't touch. Worse, he'd been slipping me high doses of blood pressure medication, disguised as herbal tea, to trigger the heart attack that nearly killed me. And my daughter, Laura, my only child, had handed him the keys to my bank account, thinking she was helping. The truth was out, but it left a wound deeper than any surgery. After Sophie called hospital security, the police arrived within hours. Detective Lisa Bennett, a woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense gaze, took our statements. She listened as Clara, my sister, laid out the evidence: the fake sale documents, the forged signatures, the offshore account where Mark had funneled $500,000 from my retirement savings. Sophie handed over the recording, her voice steady, as she described Mark's admissions. Laura sat in the corner, her face buried in her hands, sobbing quietly. I wanted to comfort her, but my heart was too raw. She'd been manipulated, yes, but she'd also betrayed me. Double quotes, Mrs. Harper. Detective Bennett said, her notepad filled with scribbles. "This is one of the most calculated cases of elder abuse I've seen. Mark's financial expertise made it look legitimate, but we've got enough to charge him with fraud, attempted harm, and elder exploitation." She glanced at Laura, her expression softening. "Your daughter's cooperation will help. We'll need her to detail every transaction she was aware of." Laura looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "I'll tell you everything," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know he was hurting her. I thought he was managing things." I watched my daughter, torn between anger and pity. Laura had always been swayed by shiny promises, new clothes, a better life. Mark had known exactly how to play her, just as he'd played me. The next few days were a blur of police interviews and hospital tests. Dr. Carter confirmed the toxicology results. The chamomile tea had been laced with concentrated metoprolol, enough to destabilize my heart over weeks. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "If you'd kept drinking that tea, we wouldn't be having this conversation." I nodded, the weight of those words settling in. Mark hadn't just wanted my money. He wanted me gone. Clara took charge, her lawyer's instincts kicking in. She worked with the police to freeze Mark's offshore account and invalidate the lake house sale. The buyers, a retired couple from Chicago, were stunned to learn the property wasn't legally transferable. They're victims too, Clara told me, her voice tight with anger. Mark took their deposit, $200,000, and funneled it into his accounts. I felt a pang of guilt for those strangers, caught in Mark's web just like me. A week later, I was discharged from the hospital, my heart stronger but my trust in tatters. Clara drove me back to my lake house, the place I'd almost lost. Walking through the front door, I felt the familiar creak of the floorboards, the scent of pine and lake water. It was mine again, legally and undeniably, thanks to Clara's trust, but the victory felt hollow. Laura hadn't called since the police took her statement, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear from her. That changed one morning when Laura showed up at my door, unannounced, carrying a box. Her hair was pulled back, her face free of makeup, and she wore a simple sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling, "I brought these back." She opened the box, revealing the earrings, the purse, a necklace, all the things she'd bought with Mark's stolen money. "I'm returning everything I can. The car's gone too." I didn't know where the money came from. I looked at her, my daughter, standing there like the little girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knee. "Laura," I said, my voice soft but firm, "why didn't you question him? Why did you give him my bank passwords?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I was stupid, Mom. He said you were getting forgetful, that you needed us to take over. I wanted to believe him because it was easier than taking care of you myself." Her words stung, but they were honest. For the first time in years, I saw my daughter without the mask. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I should have protected you." I didn't forgive her, not yet, but I felt something shift. Laura wasn't the villain. She'd been a pawn in Mark's game, just like me. "What now?" I asked. "I'm cooperating with the police," she said, "and I've applied to work with a nonprofit that helps seniors protect their finances. I want to make this right." I studied her, seeing a spark of the determination she'd had as a child, before life and Mark dulled it. "That's a start," I said finally, "but trust isn't given, Laura, it's earned." Mark's trial came a month later. He pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence, 12 years in prison for fraud, attempted harm, and elder abuse, with a lifetime ban from financial advising. The courtroom was quiet as the judge read the sentence, her voice steady but scathing. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "you preyed on the trust of a vulnerable woman and her family. Your actions were not just illegal, they were despicable." Mark didn't look at me as they led him away, his head bowed, his polished charm gone. Laura sat beside me, her hand trembling in mine. She'd testified against him, detailing every conversation, every document he'd shown her. It wasn't enough to erase her mistakes, but it was a step. After the trial, we drove back to the lake house together. The water sparkled under the afternoon sun, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. That evening, Clara and Nurse Sophie joined us for dinner. Sophie had become a friend, checking on me even after I left the hospital. "You're tougher than you look, Evelyn," she said, raising a glass of wine. "Not many people could come back from something like this." Clara nodded, her legal pad tucked away for once. "You didn't just survive, Evelyn. You fought back. And you saved that house." I looked at Laura, who was quieter than usual, her eyes on the lake. "I'm proud of you for testifying," I told her. "But we've got work to do if we're going to be a family again." She nodded, tears brimming. "I know, Mom. I want to try." For the first time, I believed her. As the sun set, painting the lake in shades of gold, I realized something. Surviving Mark's betrayal wasn't just about keeping my house or my money. It was about reclaiming my strength, my instincts, my life. Laura and I weren't healed, not yet, but we were starting. And sometimes, starting is enough. 2 years have passed since I walked out of that hospital, my heart stitched back together, my life pieced together from the wreckage of betrayal. I'm Evelyn Harper, 68 then, 70 now, a retired librarian who thought her story would end quietly by a lake in Michigan. Instead, I found myself at the center of a tale of deception, one that nearly cost me my home, my savings, and my life. My son-in-law Mark had tried to sell my lake house, locked in a trust he couldn't touch, and poisoned me with tampered medication to cover his tracks. My daughter Laura had been complicit, handing him my bank passwords, thinking she was helping, but the truth came out. Mark was in prison, and Laura and I were learning what it meant to be a family again. It wasn't easy, but it was real. One crisp morning, as I sipped coffee on my deck overlooking the lake, a letter arrived. The return address read MCI Norfolk, Mark's prison. His handwriting was shaky, less confident than the polished financial advisor I'd known. I set the letter aside, unsure if I wanted to open it. The lake sparkled under the sun, its ripples carrying memories of the life I'd almost lost. Clara, my sister, noticed the envelope when she visited later that day. "You going to read it?" she asked, her lawyer's eyes sharp but curious. "I'm not sure," I admitted, stirring my coffee. What could he possibly say that matters now? Clara, ever practical, shrugged. "Maybe nothing, maybe something." "You've always been curious, Evelyn. Might as well see what the man who tried to ruin you has to say." She was right. My librarian's instincts, the part of me that chased answers in dusty archives, won out. I opened the envelope, unfolding 2 pages of careful script. "Dear Evelyn," it began, "I know you have no reason to read this, and even less to believe me, but prison has given me time to face what I did. I tried to steal your home, your savings, your life. I convinced Laura it was for your benefit, but it was for mine. There's no excuse." He went on to say his cooperation with the police had helped uncover 3 other financial fraud schemes targeting seniors. "It doesn't undo the harm I caused you," he wrote, "but it stopped others from hurting more families. Laura's visited me a few times, not to forgive, but to ask about my methods for her work. She's stronger now, more purposeful than I ever saw her." I read the letter twice, then passed it to Clara. She scanned it, her lips pursed. "Well," she said finally, "that's not what I expected. No self-pity, no excuses, just facts." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of detachment and clarity. Mark wasn't asking for forgiveness, and I wasn't offering it. But his words confirmed something I'd suspected. Our fight had ripple effects, protecting others from predators like him. A few weeks later, I made a decision that surprised even me. I requested a visit to MCI Norfolk, not for Mark's sake, but for mine. I needed to understand the man who'd nearly erased me from my own story. Laura offered to come, but I shook my head. "This is something I need to do alone," I told her. She nodded, her eyes heavy with guilt, but also respect. The prison visiting room was cold, the metal table between us scratched and worn. Mark looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, his charm replaced by a quiet resignation. "Evelyn," he said, his voice softer than I remembered, "thank you for coming." I didn't smile. "I'm not here for you, Mark. I'm here for answers. Why did you think you could get away with it? Poisoning me, stealing my money, faking a house sale?" He looked down, his hands clasped tightly. "Arrogance," he admitted. "I'd done it before. Smaller scams, elderly clients who trusted me. I'd convinced their families it was legal, necessary. You and Laura were easy targets. Your relationship was strained, and Laura was desperate to prove herself. I used that." His honesty was jarring, like a book with its pages torn open. "I never meant to kill you," he continued. "I thought the medication would just make you sick, dependent, so I could control your finances. When you had the heart attack, I panicked." "How many others?" I asked, my voice steady. 14, he said, meeting my eyes. "Over 10 years, mostly seniors, with distant families. I'd find the cracks, busy kids, financial stress, and slip in." I leaned back, processing the scope of his crimes. He'd built a career on exploiting trust, and I'd been just another mark. "And Laura?" I asked. "Did she know about the poisoning?" "No," he said firmly. "I told her you were forgetting your pills, that I was helping. She believed me because she wanted an easy fix." I nodded, relieved but not surprised. Laura had been naive, selfish but not malicious. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because Laura asked me to," he said. "She's using what I know to help her. Nonprofit, catch people like me. It's the only thing I can do that's worth anything." We talked for another 20 minutes, his words filling in the gaps of a story I'd been piecing together for years. As I left, I felt lighter because I forgave him, but because I understood. Mark was a predator, but he was also a man, facing the consequences of his choices. Back at the lake house, I called Laura to share what I'd learned. She listened quietly, her voice steady now, the voice of a woman who'd found purpose. "How do you feel?" she asked when I finished. "Like I've closed a book," I said, watching the lake from my deck. "I know what happened, why it happened, and what we've built from it." Laura was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry I was part of it, Mom. I'm trying to make it right." "I know," I said. "And you are." Laura had transformed over the past 2 years. She'd left her banking job to work full-time at the nonprofit, teaching seniors how to spot financial scams. She visited every weekend, helping me tend the garden by the lake, our hands in the soil, as we rebuilt what we'd lost. It wasn't the mother-daughter bond we'd had when she was a child, but it was something new, honest, chosen, rooted in respect. One evening, as we sat on the deck watching the sunset, Clara and Nurse Sophie joined us. Sophie, now retired, had moved closer to the lake, her friendship a steady anchor. Clara, who'd relocated from Chicago to be near me, raised her glass. "To surviving," she said, her eyes twinkling, "and to making sure no one else goes through what you did." We toasted, the lake reflecting the last light of the day. Laura looked at me, her face softer than it had been in years. Mom, I've been asked to speak at a conference on elder protection, she said. I want to tell our story, to help others see the signs. I smiled, proud of the woman she was becoming. Do it, I said. Use what happened to us to protect someone else. As the stars appeared over the lake, I realized something profound. Mark had tried to destroy us, but he'd accidentally given us something stronger. A family built on truth, not convenience. A purpose born from pain. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a woman who'd turned betrayal into a shield for others. And that, I thought, was a story worth telling. Sitting on my deck, watching the lake reflect the Michigan sky, I feel like I've turned the final page of a long, painful story. I'm Evelyn Harper, 70 years old now, a retired librarian who survived not just a heart attack, but a betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. My son-in-law Mark tried to steal my lake house and my life, poisoning me with tampered medication and forging my signature to drain my savings. My daughter, Laura, was caught in his web, handing over my bank passwords in a misguided attempt to help. But we fought back together. Mark's in prison, my house is mine again, and Laura and I are rebuilding something honest, something real. Looking back, I see the lessons woven into the pain. Trust isn't a birthright. It's earned through actions, not words. Mark's charm was a mask, his promises a trap. But I learned to listen to my instincts, the ones honed from years of sorting truth from fiction in library stacks. I learned that family isn't just blood, it's the people who stand by you. Like my sister Clara, who fought for my home, or Nurse Sophie, who saw what others missed. And I learned that even the deepest wounds can heal, if you're willing to do the work. Laura's changed too. She's not the daughter who handed Mark the keys to my life. She's a woman who's turned her guilt into purpose, working with a nonprofit to protect seniors from scams like the one we survived. Last month, she spoke at a conference, sharing our story to teach others how to spot the signs. I was there, in the audience, watching her stand tall, her voice steady. I felt pride, not for what she'd done, but for who she was becoming. We're not the family we were, but we're something better, chosen, honest, rooted in respect. I've started writing a book with Sophie, a guide for seniors and their families on recognizing financial abuse. It's called Guarding Your Legacy, Protecting What Matters Most. Every word feels like a step toward ensuring no one else faces what I did. The lake house, once a target of greed, is now my sanctuary again, a place where I plant flowers with Laura, where we talk about the hard things, where we heal. Here's what I want you to take away. Trust your instincts. If someone insists they're acting in your best interest, especially when it comes to your money or your health, ask questions, check documents, talk to someone you trust, a lawyer, a friend, a nurse like Sophie. Predators thrive in silence, but they crumble under scrutiny. You have the right to say no, to protect what's yours, to demand the truth. If this story resonates with you, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from, or share your own story of family, trust, or survival. Your voice matters. Together, we can shine a light on the shadows where people like Mark hide, because the best defense against betrayal is a community that refuses to stay silent. Thank you for listening. Let's keep telling these stories because they're not just mine, they're ours.